Welcome to week 4 of Methods for Teaching the Academically Gifted. Today, we are focusing on planning and implementing practical applications in curriculum. That's the focus of our week. I'm Dr. Lori Benoit here at McNeese State University. Oh, excuse me. And this is going to be your lecture materials to support your reading of Education of the Gifted and Talented, Chapter 10, and Teaching Gifted Kids in Today's Classroom, Chapter 7. So make sure you check the specific page numbers on Canvas for that. Where our focus shifts this week from designing curriculum, which we talked about last week, to actually planning and implementing them. This week bridges theory and classroom reality, how we cultivate students' critical thinking and structure learning environments that allow gifted and advanced learners to thrive. We'll ground our discussion in 2 cornerstone readings, which I mentioned before. And what we are going to really focus on when we talk about each one of these is in RIM's work, which is Education of the Gifted and Talented, a lot of the theoretical models behind teaching thinking skills. This challenges us to deliberately cultivate metacognition, reasoning, and creativity. And of course, when we dip into the Teaching Gifted Kids in Today's Classroom, the Weinbrenner and Brule's work, we're going to really focus on how to do that. So we've talked about grouping before from a differentiation point of view, but we're going to talk about it today in respect to supporting teaching thinking skills. So when we group gifted learners, we can actually address how instructional organization affects engagement and the depth of learning. So together, these readings form the backbone of practical gifted education, intentional planning, and flexible implementation that moves beyond that one-size-fits-all approach, which is what we've been talking about all semester, actually. So let's go ahead and jump into our objectives. By the end of this week, you'll be able to identify how to explicitly integrate thinking skills into instruction, something RIM argues is too often left to chance. You'll also analyze how grouping strategies, from cluster grouping to flexible ability grouping, can optimize learning for both gifted and general education students. We'll see these ideas in practice through a case study that brings theory to life, and you'll apply them through your field journal and Blue Gold project. Remember, our focus here is on application, not just knowing what works for gifted students, but understanding how and why these strategies make a difference when implemented thoughtfully. RIM emphasizes that gifted education is not about faster pacing. It's about deeper thinking. So that entire work actually argues that critical and creative thinking skills need to be systematically taught and embedded in the curriculum. That means moving beyond rote recall to reasoning, analysis, synthesis, and evaluation. In practice, this involves modeling how to question, infer, hypothesize, and test ideas, not just presenting content. Importantly, these ideas should be integrated across all subject areas, not siloed in enrichment or extension lessons. For instance, in math, students might generate multiple strategies to solve a problem. In literature, they could analyze motives from multiple perspectives. RIM also highlights metacognition, helping students reflect on their own thought processes. This reflection transforms learning into a self-directed, transferable skill. And so really teaching our students to deeply think and critically think about their learning is not only at the heart of gifted education, but it's at the heart of effective education in general. So you're going to really want to reflect back onto some of your foundational understandings about Bloom's taxonomy and Webb's depth of knowledge, considering how to always make sure that you are moving your lessons and moving your students' thought process to those upper, higher order thinking skills. RIM's practical guidance centers on modeling and scaffolding thinking. And so they're actually a really big part of the work this week of the reading is about how to do it. So this modeling and scaffolding piece, which I think is so valuable. Teachers should make their own thought processes visible. So narrating how they solve, compare, and make decisions. This think aloud method helps students internalize complex reasoning. And if you're not familiar with what a think aloud is and it's not something that you regularly practice, please Google it, a think aloud as an instructional technique. It's definitely worth embedding into your tool belt, your instructional tool belt. RIM also suggests using progressive questioning techniques. So moving from convergent to divergent questioning. Ask students, what if, or why might this not work, to stretch their reasoning. She encourages fostering a classroom culture that values intellectual risk taking. Students should see mistakes as part of inquiry rather than as failure. So tools like Think Tricks, which categorizes types of thinking, comparing, analyzing, synthesizing, can help both teachers and students make thinking visible. Paired with frameworks, as I mentioned before, like Bloom's taxonomy and Webb's depth of knowledge, these tools ensure instruction systematically builds depth and rigor. So as you move forward in one of our future classes, we actually are going to go really deep with teaching divergent thinking, teaching critical thinking, and teaching creativity. But I want you to begin to consider how to implement and integrate those into your instructional repertoire right now. Not just moving through a scripted curriculum, but really analyzing it deeply to figure out where am I embedding those critical thinking questions that are going to allow my students to critically and creatively think about this material. That is key, not only to teach gifted learners, but to keep them interested and motivated. So the Weinbrenner and Brule work, the more practical application, of course, underscores that how we group students, and so yes, we're talking about grouping again, but from a different angle, can either amplify or inhibit learning. Grouping must be purposeful. It has to be based on readiness and learning goals, not fixed ability levels. And we've talked about this before, why it's so important to use student data to make decisions. One of those important pieces is how we group our students. So cluster grouping is one effective approach, placing a small number of gifted learners within a mixed ability class with a teacher trained in differentiation. This approach ensures daily challenge without segregation. Flexible grouping, by contrast, allows students to move in and out of groups depending on task or interest, maintaining equity and engagement. For instance, a student might join a research team for a project requiring advanced analytical skills, but then work in a mixed group for collaborative discussions. And so you need to consider that your groups really shouldn't be fixed all the time. We need to constantly reflect on what the purpose of the learning activity is in achieving the goals and supporting student needs for the lesson. So the literature this week actually warns against what I just mentioned, that static grouping, which can create social barriers or fixed mindsets. The key is responsiveness, and the groups should reflect data-driven decisions about current learning needs, not perceived ability, and certainly not randomness. I know it's difficult and it takes time to put the grouping together. And this is another suggestion. Instead of constantly just trying to do it all on your own by hand, use some of the AI tools that we have at our disposal and put in some of that student data that you have, especially if you have multiple pieces of student data that you're trying to use. Let some of that work be done in a more efficient way using AI, using Magic School Bus and some of those tools. And of course, you can tweak those decisions and but use it as a thought partner to streamline your work. Um, so the power of these two frameworks lies in their integration. RIM's focus on thinking skills and Brule's and Weinbrenner's emphasis on grouping work best together. Teachers can organize groups not just by content level, but by readiness for complex thinking, pairing or clustering students who can push one another's reasoning. Structured collaboration like think, pair, share, reflect helps balance challenge and support. Encouraging dialogue among peers nurtures both critical and creative thinking. One student's hypothesis can become another's counterargument. Reflective discourse helps students clarify and extend their own thinking, turning group work into a laboratory for higher order cognition. The teacher's role is to facilitate these exchanges and help students articulate how they're thinking, not just what they're thinking. And even with gifted students, it's important to recognize that, especially when we're considering critical thinking dialogue or academic dialogue, they need scaffolding and support. And so until they become really advanced and sophisticated with this skill, they are going to need some support in the sense of, if they're reflecting on a problem set or maybe they're reflecting on a reading, go ahead and have a draft for them with some templates, with some question stems that they can use to begin to practice their thinking independently before they are perhaps paired to maybe go a little bit deeper and practice some of their critical thinking skills with a discourse model. And then have it eventually to where they can share this whole class. So use the framework of like a Socratic circle or some sort of structured fishbowl so that they have the framework prepared to allow them to engage in the critical thinking discourse that reflects what they've been doing with these metacognitive strategies, but don't just throw it at them without preparing them for it. Put the time in your lesson plan to allow them the time to think about what they want to say before they are with that partner and before they are sharing it, in a whole class format like Socratic seminar or something. If you don't do that, the outcomes are not going to be as good, even for gifted learners. They need that scaffolding and that prep work. So it's worth it. It's worth it to build it in. Let's look at a case study. Miss Smith teaches sixth grade humanities. For her interdisciplinary innovation and society unit, she begins with a pre-assessment of analytical and creative thinking. The results show wide variation. Some students excel in analysis, others in creative ideation. She forms flexible groups based on thinking strength. Some teams focus on research and data interpretation. Others lead design or presentation. Each group applies RIM's Think Tricks framework to guide their problem solving, comparing historical innovations, analyzing their impacts, and synthesizing solutions for current challenges. Throughout, Ms. Smith explicitly teaches thinking moves, modeling how to trace cause and effect, test assumptions, and evaluate evidence. Students journal about their thought processes, creating visible growth in reasoning and self-awareness. When we analyze Ms. Smith's lesson through the lens of NAGC standards, several alignments emerge. Under Standard 3, which of course is the curriculum and instruction one that we've used repeatedly through this course, her curriculum is clearly differentiated. Students engage in tiered tasks and thinking strategies grounded in research-based methods. Standard 5, which we saw last week, is the programming standard. It's also evident because she uses flexible grouping to meet readiness and interest levels, ensuring that all students access appropriately challenging content. Finally, her use of metacognitive reflection aligns with Standard 2. That's the assessment one that sometimes we don't tap into as much as we should. This emphasizes self-assessment and performance-based evidence of learning. The reflection process is not a simple journal entry. It's a thinking exercise that allows students to examine how they're approaching problems. Ms. Smith's approach exemplifies a balanced, evidence-based implementation of curriculum differentiation that honors both gifted and general education learners. So again, this is just an example of how it could be used in a regular classroom. Is this going to be something that's done every single day with every single lesson? No, it's not. But when we're talking about some of those cumulative tasks, it is worth it to prepare for this level of differentiation and stratified support when we consider um, how we are designing lessons to meet gifted's needs to practice critical thinking skills. All right, so let's consider our journals for this week. The prompts invite you to look critically at your own classroom or field setting. Think about the methods and materials you use to develop critical thinking. Are they deliberate or do they emerge incidentally? Identify one example where you scaffolded reasoning, analysis, or creativity and examine it through RIM's framework of explicit thinking instruction and Brule's lens of flexible grouping. How did your approach make thinking visible for students? How did your grouping decisions enhance or limit the opportunity for advanced reasoning? Be specific. Use classroom moments to ground your analysis. This reflection strengthens your instructional intentionality and it prepares you for implementing differentiated lessons in the Blue Gold project. So I gave you some ideas with the grouping, but if there's something else that you want to pull to support your students' critical thinking here, feel free. There's plenty in both the RIM and Brule's readings. We've done quite a bit with grouping, so you might want to use some other type of strategy to support your students' critical thinking. Not a problem. Adapt it to fit your needs and your particular context, whether you're in your own classroom or whether you're observing a mentor. The next thing is our Blue Gold project overview. You'll want to move from curriculum design, which we were focusing on the last project, to actual implementation. So using the data and models that you developed, select a differentiated learning experience, ideally one that you've introduced recently, maybe even one that you did last week. Plan to implement it. The one that you designed last week, sorry, not did, that you designed. Plan to implement it now. Include some of the strategies that you have been reading about to support critical thinking, some that you've been reading about for differentiation, whether that is a grouping strategy, a particular type of thinking model. And what I'd like for you to do is collect it, implement it rather, and then collect observational notes, student work samples, and reflective feedback. These will serve as qualitative data for your analysis. Finally, evaluate how your differentiation impacted engagement and learning outcomes. So this project connects directly to the curriculum plan and outcome section of your final presentation of your paper. And you'll see that the versions of this for the blue are slightly different than what the expectations are for the gold. And that's because I do understand that you have different learning contexts. I do know and understand that. So keep that in mind when you are planning your own project, whether you're in the blue or the gold side. So let's think about bringing it all together. As we close, remember that gifted education thrives at the intersection of challenge and support. Teaching thinking skills intentionally, not incidentally, is what distinguishes deep learning from fast, disposable learning. Grouping strategies, when grounded in student data, create equitable pathways for gifted and advanced learners to engage meaningfully. Additionally, using specific strategies to support critical thinking supports all students. Your reflection this week and your project work are opportunities to make these ideas tangible. Every choice you make, the decisions you pose, the groups you form, the scaffolds you design, contributes to building a classroom culture where thinking is visible, curiosity is valued, and every learner is pushed toward their highest potential. I hope you have fun implementing some of your designs this week. Please reach out if you have any questions.